Dignity is not what you demand from others. It is what you refuse to let them take from you. What you are about to hear is a story that proves the old saying, the most expensive lesson in life is the one you did not think you needed to learn. It is a story about a quiet 72-year-old man, a cup of spilled coffee, a water bottle that fell to the floor, and a moment of public humiliation on a packed airplane. But it is also about what happened next. It is about the single 7-word phone call he made from the terminal. A call that set in motion a financial tidal wave so immense it brought a multi-billion-dollar airline to its knees. This is not just about revenge. It is about a reckoning that cost Transatlantic Airways $4 billion. Before we dive deeper, I want to ask you something. Have you ever witnessed someone being treated unfairly and wish they had the power to stand up for themselves? If this story strikes a chord, hit that subscribe button and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Because in the next 20 minutes, everything you think you know about power bias and consequences is about to shift. This is not just another viral video of an airline passenger being mistreated. This is what happens when corporations forget that behind every ticket is a human being deserving of respect. And sometimes that human being has the resources to remind them. The air in the terminal at Chicago O'Hare International was thick with the usual cocktail of human anxiety and cinnamon buns. It was a symphony of rolling suitcases, garbled announcements, and the soft, incessant beeping of carts navigating through the weary. The scent of burnt coffee and sanitizer created that unmistakable airport perfume that clung to clothes long after departure. Among the throngs of travelers was Walter Reynolds. At 72, he had a presence that was both unassuming and deeply rooted, like an old oak tree in a bustling park. The fluorescent lights cast shadows across his face, highlighting the lines that life had etched there, not from bitterness, but from experience. Walter wore simple, comfortable khaki pants, a well-worn but clean navy blue polo shirt, and practical dark leather loafers. In his hands, he held not a smartphone or a tablet, but a heavy, hardbound copy of Meditations by Marcus Aurelius, its pages softened by years of turning. To look at him, you would never guess that Walter Reynolds was worth $8.7 billion, or that he had built Lighthouse Capital from nothing, creating one of the most successful logistics and investment firms in America. He was flying to San Francisco, not for business. Those days were largely behind him, but for something far more important. His granddaughter Zoe was graduating from Stanford with a master's in computer science. He would not miss it for the world. Tucked carefully inside his worn leather carry-on bag was a small, heavy box containing a vintage 1955 Patek Philippe watch, a graduation gift he had spent months hunting down. It was the same model his own father had worn, a symbol of time, legacy, and the value of patient work. As Walter waited, his mind drifted back to Chicago, 1956. He was just 3 years old, perched on his father's shoulders outside the steel mill gates. Emmanuel Reynolds was walking off his shift, still in his work clothes, his face streaked with sweat and soot. A white foreman approached, clipboard in hand. "Reynolds," the man said gruffly, "the mill's promoting 3 men to supervisor next month. Your name's on the list." His father's body had tensed beneath him. "That right, Mr. Caldwell. Do not get excited," Caldwell said. "Board's likely to pass you over. They are saying the men will not take orders from a colored supervisor." Walter remembered his father's quiet reply. "The men already do take my orders, Mr. Caldwell. Every day on the floor." A week later, Caldwell had appeared at their front door on a Sunday, an unexpected visitor in their segregated neighborhood. He had handed Emmanuel a small box. "You are getting that promotion," he said, "and you will need to look the part." Inside was the Patek Philippe watch, not new but elegant and valuable. When Emmanuel protested, Caldwell shook his head. "My father left me 2 things when he died," he explained. "This watch and his prejudices. I am keeping one and giving the other away." Time does not see color, Reynolds. Neither should people. That watch had become a symbol in the Reynolds family, A reminder that dignity could never be taken without consent, only surrendered or defended. Walter had lived a life that defied the boundaries placed on him. At 26, fresh from his MBA, and with a business plan rejected by 17 banks, he had turned to private investors to launch his first logistics company. He still remembered the sting of the loan officer's words at the final rejection. "Mr. Reynolds, your plan is sound, but we are looking for entrepreneurs who fit our institutional profile." The unspoken message hung in the air between them. People who looked like Walter did not build global logistics companies. When asked why he named it Lighthouse, he simply said, "Because even in the darkest storms, we need to show the way." Now, nearly 5 decades later, Lighthouse Capital managed billions in assets and had revolutionized global supply chain financing. Yet despite his success, Walter still moved through the world with the caution born from experience. Success had not shielded him from the small indignities, the security guards who followed him in high-end stores, the hosts who assumed he was lost when he entered exclusive restaurants, the business associates who expressed surprise at his articulation. So Walter had learned to travel light, dress modestly, and speak softly. Not out of shame, but strategy. "Let them underestimate you," he often told Zoe. "Their surprise is your advantage." As he sat in the airport lounge, Walter watched families rush by, business people hunched over laptops, and airport staff navigating the controlled chaos. He observed it all with the calm interest of a man who had seen the world change around him, sometimes because of his own quiet influence. His flight would be boarding soon. Transatlantic Airways Flight 327 to San Francisco. He had booked it last minute when his private jet required unexpected maintenance. It had been years since he had flown commercial, but Walter was not concerned. He was looking forward to the quiet hours with his book, the anonymity of being just another passenger. Tonight, he would surprise Zoe at her pre-graduation dinner, see the joy on her face when she realized he had made it after all. Walter checked his watch, his own Patek Philippe, identical to the one nestled in his bag for Zoe. It was time to make his way to the gate. The central concourse of O'Hare's Terminal 3 hummed with activity. Announcements echoed from overhead speakers, competing with the steady drone of countless conversations and the squeak of luggage wheels on polished floors. The air carried the distinct blend of coffee, fast food, and the faint antiseptic scent that seemed universal to all airports. Walter made his way through the crowd with the unhurried confidence of someone who had nowhere to be, but exactly where he was going. He navigated past the duty-free shops selling overpriced perfumes, the electronic stores with gadgets no one needed, and the newsstands with their walls of magazines showing faces he did not recognize. At Gate H17, the boarding process for Transatlantic Airways Flight 327 to San Francisco was about to begin. The gate area was packed with travelers of all types. Families with exhausted children, business travelers tapping impatiently at phones, couples leaning into each other for comfort in the institutional discomfort of travel. Walter took a seat at the edge of the waiting area, placing his book on his knee and his small carry-on by his feet. He watched the transatlantic staff move behind the counter, tapping at computers and speaking in hushed, efficient tones to one another. Their navy blue uniforms with silver accents were crisp and professional, projecting an image of competence and order that airlines worked hard to maintain, even when circumstances challenged that perception. The gate agent's voice came over the speaker, announcing that boarding would begin shortly, starting with first-class and elite status members. Walter observed as the privileged few gathered their belongings, presenting their boarding passes with the casual entitlement of the frequently accommodated. Walter waited patiently for his group to be called. His ticket was in Group 4, a middle seat as expected for a last-minute booking. He was not concerned. The discomfort of a middle seat was a small price to pay for seeing Zoe's face when he arrived. Now boarding Group 4. The gate agent finally announced, and Walter rose, gathering his carry-on and book. He joined the line, moving with the slow, deliberate economy of motion of a man whose joints ached slightly from the damp Chicago air. When he reached the aircraft door, He offered a warm, genuine smile to the flight attendant standing there. "Good morning," he said, his voice a low, pleasant baritone. The flight attendant, a woman in her late 30s named Jessica Morris, gave him a cursory plastic smile that did not reach her eyes. "Morning. Welcome aboard." Her gaze already flicked past him to the next passenger, though Walter noticed how it lingered appreciatively on a well-dressed white businessman behind him. Jessica was having a bad day, which was compounding a bad week and a bad year. A recent divorce had left her finances precarious, and the relentless pressure of dealing with irritable passengers was wearing her patience to a fine, brittle thread. This morning, her ex-husband had texted that he would be late with the child support payment. Again. The mortgage on the house she fought to keep was due in 3 days. She had once loved this job. 15 years ago, when she first pinned on those silver wings, Jessica had genuinely cared about customer service. But years of entitled passengers treating her like a servant, management cutting benefits while increasing workloads, and the constant stress of maintaining perfect composure had hardened something inside her. Now she found herself dividing passengers into categories: the elites who deserved attention, the ordinary travelers who warranted basic service, and the problems who needed to be controlled. Just last month, Victoria Harrington herself, the CEO, had praised Jessica's commitment to maintaining standards after she had a disruptive passenger removed from a flight. The passenger, a young black woman, who had questioned being moved from her assigned seat to accommodate a late-arriving platinum member, had filed a complaint. Victoria had personally called Jessica to assure her that maintaining order and hierarchy was essential to Transatlantic's business model. "You protected our premium customer experience," Victoria had said. "That is what this airline is built on." Walter noticed the strain around Jessica's eyes, but said nothing. He had learned long ago to recognize the difference between personal stress and personal slight. With a gentle nod, he moved past her into the aircraft. The narrow aisle of the Boeing 737 was already crowded with passengers stowing luggage and finding seats. The air inside was stale and warm, carrying the faint scent of coffee and industrial cleaning products. Walter made his way down the aisle, politely sidestepping to let others pass, when the flow of traffic momentarily stalled. 22B, he murmured to himself, finding his row and glancing at his assigned middle seat. A young man was already lost in the percussive blast from his headphones in the window seat, while the aisle seat remained empty for now. Walter's first task was to stow his carry-on. The overhead bin directly above his seat was already crammed full. He looked ahead and saw a small available space in the bin across the aisle. As he carefully lifted his bag, which felt heavy due to the book and the watch box, he saw Jessica approaching, escorting another passenger to their seat. Walter carefully lifted his carry-on toward the overhead bin across the aisle. The small Patek Philippe box and hardbound book made the bag heavier than it appeared, and he moved with deliberate care, conscious of the tight quarters and passengers still boarding around him. As he extended his arms to place the bag, his elbow inadvertently brushed against Jessica, who was trying to squeeze past him in the aisle. He felt her stiffen at the contact, and the muscles in his own back tightened in anticipation. "Watch it!" She snapped, her voice sharp with irritation. The words cut through the ambient noise of the cabin, drawing the attention of nearby passengers. Walter recoiled slightly, surprised by her tone. A flash of memory being told to watch himself in a department store 30 years ago flickered through his mind before he pushed it aside. "My apologies," he said sincerely, keeping his voice calm and measured. "It is a bit tight in here." Jessica ignored his apology and eyed his bag with narrowed eyes, her gaze calculating. In another passenger, a younger white man in a business suit. Perhaps she might have seen an honest mistake. In Walter, she saw a challenge. Something in his calm dignity triggered a defensive response she did not fully understand herself. "Sir, that bin is for the passengers in that row," she said, pointing to the seats beneath the compartment he was using. "You need to find space near your own seat." Her voice carried a practiced authority that brooked no discussion. Walter glanced back at the completely full bin above his assigned row, then returned his attention to Jessica. "I understand," he said calmly, gesturing to the packed bin above him. "It seems this one is quite full. I saw a spot right here, and I wanted to get out of the aisle quickly to let others pass." The middle-aged woman in the seat beneath the contested bin looked up from her magazine. "I do not mind if he uses this space," she offered quietly. "There is plenty of room." Jessica shot the woman a look that silenced her immediately, then turned back to Walter. "That is not how it works. Policy is policy." Her voice had the rehearsed cadence of someone who had used those exact words countless times before. Walter understood rules, but he also understood reason. Dragging his bag to the back of the plane, only to have to fight his way back upstream after landing, seemed inefficient and disruptive. Besides, the small bag contained his precious gift. He wanted to keep it close. "Ma'am, with all due respect, it is a standardized carry-on, and there is an open space right here," he said, keeping his voice level and respectful. "It will not inconvenience anyone." He tried to give her another reassuring smile, but it was lost on her. In Walter's calm demeanor, Jessica did not see reason. She saw defiance. In his simple clothes and humble appearance, she saw someone who did not belong in the world of priority boarding and premier status she dealt with all day. She saw a problem. Her mind flashed to last month's incident with the aggressive businessman who had screamed in her face when told to turn off his phone, and how management had sided with him after he filed a complaint. She would not let that happen again. This time, she would maintain control. "Sir, I am telling you the policy. If you cannot find space, we will have to check your bag at the gate." Her voice rose slightly, making it clear to everyone nearby that a confrontation was developing. The thought of his carefully packaged, irreplaceable gift being thrown into the cargo hold sent a jolt of concern through Walter. His heart rate increased slightly the first crack in his composed exterior. "No, I would really rather not do that. This bag stays with me." This was the final straw for Jessica. To her, no was a challenge to her authority, a public rejection of her instructions. Her face hardened as memories of other confrontations, other difficult passengers, other times she had been undermined flashed through her mind. "Sir, you are holding up the boarding process and refusing to follow a crew member's instructions. I need you to either check the bag or find another spot. Now." The young businessman in 23A, who had been watching the interaction with growing discomfort, stood up. "Hey, he can put his bag in the space above me. It is empty. Please stay out of this." Jessica snapped without looking at him. "Sit down." Just then, a kind-faced younger flight attendant, Lucia Ramirez, who was working the galley, overheard the escalating tension. She came over and said quietly to Jessica, "Jessica, there is a bit of room in the first-class closet. It is just a small bag. We can put it there for him." Jessica shot Lucia a venomous glare. "I can handle this, Lucia. Go back to your duties. This is my section." The subtext was clear: "I outrank you, and I will not be undermined by a junior flight attendant." Lucia hesitated. At 26, she was still learning the unwritten rules of airline hierarchy. But something about this situation felt wrong. Having grown up in East Los Angeles, the daughter of immigrants who had faced similar treatment, she recognized the subtle dynamics at play. She had seen her own father, a skilled electrician, dismissed and disrespected by clients who saw his accent before his expertise. "I just thought," she began. "You thought wrong." Jessica cut her off. "Now go." She turned back to Walter, her authority now doubly challenged by a passenger and a colleague. "So last chance. Cooperate, or I will be forced to call the ground supervisor." Walter looked from Jessica's rigid, angry face to Lucia's concerned one. He was not a man who sought conflict. He simply wanted to get to his granddaughter's graduation. He felt a familiar tightness in his chest, the same feeling he had had decades ago when a police officer had pulled him over for driving too nice a car in this neighborhood. The feeling of being trapped in someone else's narrative. He sighed softly. "Very well. I will look for space in the back." He began to turn, but as he did, the passenger behind him, impatient with the delay, pushed forward, bumping into Walter. Walter stumbled slightly, his hand gripping the seat back to steady himself. He felt his grip on his bag loosen for a split second. It tilted, and from the unzipped side pocket, a small metal water bottle he had forgotten to secure slipped out. It fell to the floor, not with a loud crash, but with a dull metallic clatter. For Jessica, this was the act of aggression she seemed to be waiting for. "That is it." He threw his bottle. "He is being aggressive," she shouted, her voice ringing with a strange mix of fear and triumph. "I need security." The accusation was so absurd, so disconnected from reality, that for a moment the entire cabin section fell silent. Walter stared at her, utterly bewildered. The young man in the window seat pulled off his headphones. The woman in the aisle seat peered over in confusion. "Lucia." The other flight attendant looked horrified. He did not throw at Jessica. "It just fell," she said, her voice pleading. Everyone saw it fall, but it was too late. Jessica was already speaking into the cabin intercom, her voice trembling with manufactured hysteria. "Calling the gate agent. We have a non-compliant aggressive passenger in row 22, requesting immediate assistance and security." Several passengers around them began to murmur in disbelief. A woman 3 rows up pulled out her phone and began recording discreetly. 2 businessmen exchanged glances of shock and disapproval. Walter Reynolds stood perfectly still in the narrow aisle, the fallen water bottle by his feet. He looked at the faces of the passengers around him. He saw confusion, annoyance, a little fear, and in a few, a flicker of sympathy. His hands felt cold, and he was aware of his heartbeat, strong and steady, despite the rush of adrenaline. He had built a global logistics empire from nothing, negotiated multi-billion-dollar deals with titans of industry and heads of state, and stared down the most ruthless corporate raiders on Wall Street. Yet here he was, in the cramped cabin of a commercial airplane, being accused of aggression over a fallen water bottle. He felt a profound sense of weary disappointment. The world, it seemed, could always find new ways to be small. Within minutes, a stern-faced gate supervisor named Michael Bennett arrived, followed by 2 burly airport security officers. Michael listened to Jessica's breathless, exaggerated account without once looking at Walter. He saw a flustered employee and an elderly black man in simple clothes. The calculation in his mind was immediate and uncomplicated. Michael, at 47, had worked his way up from baggage handler to supervisor over 20 years with Transatlantic. He prided himself on his efficiency and ability to handle situations. In reality, this often meant placating difficult employees and removing problem passengers with minimal disruption to the schedule. His performance reviews praised his decisive action and support of staff authority code for prioritizing quick solutions over nuanced understanding, Sir Michael said, addressing Walter with a tone that brooked no argument. "I am going to have to ask you to gather your belongings and come with me." Walter felt a cold clarity descend over him, the same clarity he had felt in countless boardrooms when an opponent underestimated him. On what grounds, he asked, his voice still quiet, but now edged with cold steel. "You have failed to comply with crew instructions and have caused a disturbance," Michael recited from an invisible script, avoiding Walter's direct gaze. "That is a gross mischaracterization of events," Walter stated flatly. "The flight attendant was unreasonable, and my water bottle fell by accident." The control in his voice was total, but beneath it was a simmering awareness of the injustice unfolding. Lucia took a half-step forward, her conscience compelling her to speak despite her junior status. "Sir, I saw what happened. The bottle just fell." "Lucia." Jessica cut her off sharply. "You were not even here for most of it. Do not get involved." The threat to Lucia's job hung unspoken in the air. Michael glanced at Lucia with a dismissive look that clearly communicated she should stay out of it. He turned back to Walter. "Sir, we are not going to debate this here. You are delaying the departure of this aircraft. Please come with me now, or we will have you forcibly removed." A woman across the aisle stood up, a professor type in her 50s. "This is ridiculous. I saw the whole thing. He did absolutely nothing wrong." Her indignation was palpable, her voice shaking slightly. "Ma'am, please sit down," Michael said without looking at her. "This does not concern you. It concerns all of us when we see someone treated unfairly," she retorted, but reluctantly sat when one of the security officers moved toward her. "I am Dr. Catherine Powell, professor of business ethics at UC Berkeley, and I will absolutely be filing a formal complaint about this incident." Michael flinched slightly at her credentials, but pressed on. "That is your right, ma'am. Now please allow us to handle this situation." Walter looked at the two security officers, then back at Michael and Jessica. He saw no path to reason here. Making a scene would only fulfill their false narrative. He would not give them the satisfaction. With a quiet dignity that seemed to infuriate Jessica more than any outburst could have, he bent down, picked up his water bottle, and retrieved his carry-on bag from the floor. His movements were deliberate, controlled, but those close enough could see the slight tremor in his hands, not from fear, but from the effort of containing his justified anger. He turned to the businessman who had offered his overhead space. "Thank you for your kindness," he said softly. Then he looked at Lucia, whose eyes were filled with distress. "And yours." As the security officers escorted him off the plane, a low murmur rippled through the cabin. A few more passengers pulled out their phones, discreetly recording the quiet, humiliating procession. Walter Reynolds walked with his back straight, his head held high. Inside, though, a storm was brewing. He felt the familiar weight of accumulated indignities, decades of small cuts that never seemed to stop, regardless of wealth or achievement. This time, however, was different. This time, the injury came with the additional sting of missing his granddaughter's milestone moment, something he could never recover. He was not just being removed from a flight. A line had been crossed. And for Transatlantic Airways, a clock had just started ticking. They just did not know it yet. The last thing Walter saw as he was led away was Jessica's face flushed with victory, and something else, relief perhaps, at having successfully diverted her frustrations onto someone else. Beside her, Lucia stood with her hands clasped tightly in front of her, her expression a mixture of shame and helpless anger. As they walked back up the jet bridge, Walter heard a voice behind them, the professor who had spoken up. "This is wrong," she called after them. "I am filing a complaint." Michael did not break stride. "Feel free, ma'am. Enjoy your flight." The jet bridge felt longer on the return journey, each step an indignity. Walter noticed one of the security officers, a young Hispanic man, avoiding his eyes, clearly uncomfortable with his role in this charade. The other officer, older and white, maintained a professional blankness. The last echoes of the aircraft faded behind them as they emerged back into the brightness and noise of the terminal, where life continued as normal for everyone else. Only Walter knew that everything had just changed. The administrative office was a small, featureless room just off the main gate area. The fluorescent lighting cast a harsh glow over the institutional gray walls and the generic office furniture. A single window looked out onto the tarmac, where Walter could see Flight 327, his flight still parked at the gate. Michael Bennett gestured for Walter to take a seat in one of the uncomfortable plastic chairs. The security officers remained by the door, their posture relaxed now that they were away from the public eye of the aircraft cabin. "We will be rebooking you on a later flight, Mr. Reynolds," Michael said, consulting a monitor without making eye contact. "Looks like the next available seat to San Francisco is tomorrow morning at 6:45 a.m. Walter looked at him, his expression unreadable. "That is unacceptable. My granddaughter's graduation ceremony is this evening." Michael shrugged, a gesture of peak bureaucratic indifference. "I am sorry, sir, but that is the best we can do. Your disruptive behavior caused you to be removed from the flight. You are lucky the airline is not pressing charges or banning you permanently." The sheer injustice of the statement hit Walter like a physical blow. His chest tightened, and for a moment, the controlled executive gave way to the wounded man. "My disruptive behavior," he repeated, his voice low but intense. A water bottle fell from my bag accidentally, and I was treated like a criminal. Michael finally looked at him, uncomfortable with the direct confrontation. Sir, I was not there. I have to go by what my flight attendant reported. She said you were argumentative and threw an object, and you believed her without question, Walter said. It was not a question, but an observation. Michael shifted in his seat, the first sign of doubt crossing his features. It is not my job to question staff reports, sir. I just implement the protocols. Walter felt a wave of weariness wash over him. How many protocols had been used throughout his life to justify injustice? How many people had hidden behind procedures rather than exercising judgment? He thought of Zoe, picturing her expectant face in the crowd, searching for him. A pang of genuine pain, sharper than any anger, pierced through his composure. This they had taken from him. Not just a seat on a plane, but a moment with his family he would never get back. Walter's mind flashed back to another time 27 years ago, when he had been turned away from a private banking event at the Waldorf Astoria, an event he had been invited to as a keynote speaker. There must be some mistake, the host had said, looking past him to the door. We are expecting Walter Reynolds, the financier. I am Walter Reynolds, he had replied. Oh, awkward pause. We were expecting someone different. The memory still stung, not because of the insult, but because it had made him miss his son's baseball game, the regional championship his team had won. A moment he could never reclaim, just as he could never reclaim Zoe's graduation. Walter simply nodded to Michael. I see. We will email you this new itinerary, Michael said, already turning to leave. You can pick up your checked luggage, if any, at the baggage claim office. He and the security officers left Walter alone in the sterile room. For a long moment, Walter sat in the uncomfortable plastic chair. He did not rage. He did not despair. Instead, a lifetime of discipline kicked in. Emotion was a current he knew, but logic was the rudder. He closed his eyes and allowed the hot flush of anger to wash over him and then recede, leaving behind a cold, clear, and absolute resolve. His hands resting on his knees were steady now, the tremor gone. In its place was purpose. He had built his fortune on a simple principle. Systems, whether for logistics or for human interaction, must be efficient and just. What he had just experienced was a catastrophic failure of a system. It was inefficient, unjust, and predicated on prejudice and poor judgment. The system had failed him, and he knew with a certainty that chilled the air around him that it had failed countless others before him, and it would continue to fail more unless the system itself was corrected. Not with a complaint letter, not with a lawsuit for damages, but by addressing the root of the problem, the arrogant, unaccountable corporate culture of Transatlantic Airways. Walter opened his eyes and saw through the window that Flight 327 was finally pushing back from the gate, nearly 20 minutes behind schedule due to the incident. The irony was not lost on him. He had learned over decades in business that true power was not in reacting emotionally, but in responding strategically. Jessica and Michael had temporary authority in this situation, but Walter had something far more potent: capital influence and patience. He stood up, straightened his polo shirt, and walked out of the office. The Patek Philippe watch on his wrist, the twin to Zoe's gift, glinted under the terminal lights. Time, as his father had taught him, revealed all truths eventually. Now it would reveal what happened when someone mistook Walter Reynolds' dignity for a negotiable asset. Walter found a quiet corner of the terminal overlooking the tarmac. Through the massive glass windows, he watched as Flight 327, his flight, taxied onto the runway and climbed into the gray Chicago sky, carrying with it his hopes of seeing Zoe walk across the stage. For a moment, he allowed himself to feel the full weight of what had been taken from him. Not just the seat on the plane, but the irreplaceable moment with his family. He touched the gift box in his carry-on, feeling its solid presence, and thought of the expression he would never see on Zoe's face when she opened it at the ceremony. A complex mix of emotions churned within him. Disappointment, grief for the missed moment, and yes, anger. Not the hot reactive anger that leads to poor decisions, but the cold, focused anger that had fueled many of his most consequential business moves over the decades. The anger of a man who has seen injustice too many times and finally decides enough. Is this worth what I am about to do? He asked himself. $4 billion was no small sum even for him. Was personal dignity worth such an investment? The answer came to him not as a financial calculation, but as a moral certainty. This was not just about him. It was about all the people who faced similar treatment, but lacked the resources to demand accountability. He thought about what the $4.2 billion could alternatively fund scholarships for thousands of students, like Zoe Community Development in underserved neighborhoods, healthcare initiatives for those without access. These were all causes he already supported generously. But sometimes systemic change required a different approach. Sometimes you had to speak to institutions in the only language they truly understood: power. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out an old nondescript flip phone. He did not care for smartphones. Too many distractions. He had one number on speed dial that he used for occasions such as this. He pressed the button. It rang once. Yes, Walter. A crisp, energetic voice answered. It was Sophia Martinez, the brilliant CEO of Walter's private family office and massive equity fund, Lighthouse Capital. Sophia was a prodigy Walter had mentored years ago, a woman whose financial acumen was matched only by her fierce loyalty. Walter's voice was calm, devoid of any of the turmoil he felt. Sophia, good morning. Good morning. I thought you were in the air by now. Is everything all right? Her tone shifted immediately to concern, detecting the subtle difference in Walter's voice that few would notice. There has been a change of plans. Walter set his eyes fixed on the Transatlantic Airways logo on a nearby gate sign. I require your immediate and undivided attention for the rest of the day. Cancel your other appointments. Sophia did not question it. She had learned over a decade of working with Walter that when he used this particular tone, measured precise, with a subtle undercurrent of steel, something significant was about to happen. Done. What do you need? Here it was. The moment the pivot happened, the moment a personal grievance was about to be translated into the language the world truly understood: capital. We have a new acquisition priority, Walter said. Sophia was intrigued. Oh, what sector are we looking at? Tech, green energy, aviation, Walter replied. He paused for effect. I want you to begin acquiring assets related to Transatlantic Airways. There was a brief silence on the other end of the line as Sophia's formidable brain processed the instruction. The airline, Walter. Their stock is stable, but their fundamentals are messy. High debt load, union issues, thin margins. It is not our usual target profile. She sounded puzzled, but was already pulling up Transatlantic's financial data on her screen. I am not interested in acquiring the company, Sophia. Not yet. I am interested in acquiring its debt. All of it. Start with the unsecured corporate bonds and the syndicated bank loans. I want to become their primary creditor. Sophia was now completely silent. She understood. This was not an investment. It was a power play. A hostile surgical strike aimed not at the stock, but at the financial foundation of the entire corporation. Buying up a company's debt was a far more subtle and dangerous game than a simple stock takeover. Walter, she said finally, her voice both cautious and concerned. What happened? Walter briefly explained the incident on the plane. As he spoke, he could hear Sophia's fingers flying across her keyboard, already beginning to map out the strategy. Walter. That is a significant position, Sophia said, when he finished, the awe clear in her voice. To get a controlling interest in their debt structure, we would need to liquidate a lot. We are talking billions. I am aware, Walter said. Liquidate our entire position in the Meridian Real Estate Investment Trust. That should free up about $1.5 billion. Then divest from the Horizon Tech Fund. That is another $2 billion. And sell our treasury bond holdings. That should give you what you need. The names were titans of the investment world. Selling them off in a single day would create waves. That is. That is nearly $4 billion in liquid capital. Sophia whispered, the scale of the maneuver dawning on her. Walter, is it enough? Walter asked simply. Yes, Sophia said, her voice now firm, the strategist in her taking over. Yes, it will be more than enough. How do you want this handled? Quietly, Walter instructed. Use our subsidiary holding companies in Delaware and the Cayman Islands. Spread the buys across multiple brokers. I do not want Transatlantic's board to know what's happening until it is too late. I want them to wake up one morning and realize their financial fate rests in a single pair of hands. My hands. Consider it done, Sophia said. I will assemble the team. We will start immediately. There was a pause. Walter, may I ask something else? Go ahead. Is this the right response? $4 billion over a water bottle incident. Her voice carried no judgment, only a genuine question about proportionality. Walter Reynolds looked out the window as another transatlantic plane landed. He thought of Jessica Morris's sneer, Michael Bennett's dismissiveness, and his granddaughter's empty chair beside her parents. This is not about a water bottle, Sophia. It is not even about missing Zoe's graduation, though that pains me deeply. He paused, gathering his thoughts. This is about a system that allows people with a little authority to abuse it with impunity. It is about accountability at a level that corporations understand the bottom line. And it is about all the people who face these indignities without the resources to demand justice. He heard Sophia's soft exhale of understanding. They made me miss a graduation, he said finally. It was a systemic failure. And now they will learn what systemic correction looks like. With that, he ended the call. He had not raised his voice. He had not sworn or threatened. He had simply issued a series of calm, precise instructions. But in that 5-minute phone call, Walter Reynolds had signed a $4 billion death warrant for Transatlantic Airways as it currently existed. The storm had broken. Lucia Ramirez sat in the cramped crew break room at San Francisco International Airport, her hands trembling slightly as she typed on her phone. Flight 327 had landed 20 minutes ago, and she had excused herself the moment they reached the gate, claiming she needed to use the restroom. Instead, she had come here to a space where airline staff could briefly escape the constant demands of passengers and supervisors. Her conscience had been eating at her since they left Chicago. The image of Walter's dignified face as he was escorted off the plane haunted her. She had only been flying for 3 years, but she had already witnessed the subtle pattern. Certain passengers, often older, often minorities, receiving different treatment, subject to stricter enforcement of policies that were routinely waived for others. Usually, she stayed silent, afraid for her job, afraid of confrontation. Not today. She navigated to a popular online forum for flight attendants and aviation professionals called The Crew Lounge, created a new account with the username FlyGirlWitness, and began to type, I need to share something that happened today on a flight from ORD to SFO. I am still shaking as I write this. I watched a decent, calm, elderly man be humiliated and removed from our flight for absolutely no good reason. Flight 327, Transatlantic Airways. The man was trying to stow his small carry-on when another FA accused him of being aggressive because his water bottle accidentally fell out of his bag. I was there. I saw it happen. There was nothing aggressive about this man. He was polite, reasonable, and dignified throughout. I tried to intervene, but I was shut down. Then gate supervisors came and removed him from the flight. The whole thing was wrong on every level. I have been flying for 3 years, and I have seen my share of difficult passengers. This man was not one of them. He was an elderly gentleman, a grandfather by the sounds of it, just trying to get to his family. What happened today was not about security or policy. It was about a power trip. It was about an abuse of authority, and it was wrong. Our airline preaches about customer service and respect, but when the doors close, that sometimes goes out the window. I feel ashamed of what I saw and for not doing more to stop it. I do not know what to do now. I'm afraid for my job, but I cannot stay silent. She hesitated for a moment, then pressed post. Within minutes, the responses began to flood in. This happens way too often. Management always backs the FA, even when they are clearly in the wrong. I have seen similar incidents. The problem is, once someone calls security, there is no turning back. No one wants to admit a mistake. Was the passenger a POC just asking because we all know how this plays out? One response particularly caught Lucia's attention. I work for TA too. Last month, I saw an FA call security on a woman wearing a hijab because she looked nervous. She was a doctor flying to a medical conference. Nothing happened to the FA, even though multiple passengers complained. Lucia's post continued to gain traction as flight crews across the country weighed in. Then, 3 hours after her original post, someone with the username Professor Witness joined the thread. I was on that flight in row 25. I saw the whole thing. It was disgraceful. The man did nothing wrong. His bottle literally just fell when someone bumped into him. The FA was hostile from the start. I spoke up but was told to mind my own business. I have video. The post included a link to a 30-second clip. The video was not dramatic. There was no shouting or struggle, but its quietness was its power. It showed an elderly black man, his face a mask of dignified resignation, being led away by 2 large officers, while Jessica stood in the background with a look of grim satisfaction. The story broke out of the confines of the aviation forum. A travel blogger with a large following on Twitter linked to the post and the video. The hashtag @DignifiedFlight327 started trending, though no one knew Walter's real name yet. People began sharing their own stories. Transatlantic Air removed my 78-year-old father from a flight last year when he asked for help with his bag. Said he was making demands. Dignified Flight 227. I witnessed a black woman get questioned about her first-class ticket 3 times on a TA flight while white passengers walked right by. This is systematic. Dignified Flight 327. By evening, local San Francisco news, intrigued by the Stanford graduation angle mentioned in the original post, picked up the story. Elderly man removed from flight misses granddaughter's graduation, read the headline on the San Francisco Chronicle's website. As the story spread, more passengers from Flight 327 came forward with their accounts and additional video footage. None of it supported Jessica's claim of aggression. All of it showed a composed older gentleman being subjected to what many were now calling a clear case of racial profiling. One passenger, a civil rights attorney, wrote a detailed analysis of the incident, pointing out the systemic patterns of discrimination it revealed. What we witnessed was not just a bad day for one flight attendant, he wrote. It was a glimpse into how bias becomes embedded in enforcement protocols, creating 2-tiered systems of treatment that particularly impact people of color. The discussion expanded to broader airline practices. Ever notice how random security checks are not so random? At Dignified Flight 327, airlines need to stop hiding behind safety protocols when what they are really protecting is a culture of discrimination. Dignified Flight 327. I am a former TA flight attendant. Company training explicitly tells us to use more caution with certain passenger profiles. They are creating this problem. Dignified Flight 327. By midnight, the story was on the crawl at the bottom of national news networks. Transatlantic Airways was now facing a public relations nightmare, with commentators and social media users alike condemning the airline's actions. In her small apartment in Oakland, Lucia watched the story explode with a mixture of validation and terror. She had done the right thing by speaking up, but she knew there would be consequences. Her phone had already lit up with a message from her supervisor: mandatory meeting tomorrow 9 a.m. She closed her eyes, thinking of her mother's words when she first applied to be a flight attendant. Remember, mijita, sometimes doing the right thing costs something, but not doing it costs even more. Meanwhile, in the executive suites of Transatlantic Airways headquarters, a different storm was brewing. One that had nothing to do with viral videos or public opinion, and everything to do with the quiet financial maneuvers being orchestrated by Sofia Martinez and her team at Lighthouse Capital. The two storms were on a collision course, and at their intersection stood Walter Reynolds, calmly watching both develop from his hotel room in Chicago. Victoria Harrington's corner office on the 50th floor of the Transatlantic Airways headquarters offered a spectacular view of the Chicago skyline. At 53, Victoria had fought her way to the CEO position through a combination of ruthless efficiency, strategic vision, and an unwavering focus on the bottom line. Her sleek bob of silver blonde hair and tailored suits had become her trademark, as had her reputation for prioritizing shareholder value above all else. 20 years earlier, Victoria had been the rising star in Transatlantic's marketing department, full of ideas about passenger experience and brand loyalty. Fresh from business school, she had drafted an ambitious plan called Sky Service Excellence, focused on transforming the airline's approach to customer care. The true product we sell is not transportation. It is the experience, she had written. Every interaction matters, her boss had laughed. Nice theory, Vicky, but in this business, the only metrics that matter are load factors and fuel costs. People buy tickets based on price and schedule, not how we make them feel. Over the next 5 years, she watched as her innovative customer service initiatives were systematically dismantled in favor of cost-cutting measures. Meals became buy on board. Legroom shrank. Fees multiplied. When she objected in a management meeting, the COO had pulled her aside afterward. "You are smart, Victoria," he had said. "But you need to decide which side you are on, the customers or the company." It was a false dichotomy, she believed then. But gradually, as she rose through the ranks, she made the calculated compromises needed to advance. She learned to value metrics over moments, systems over people. By the time she reached the C-suite, the transformation was complete. She had become the perfect embodiment of a corporate culture that saw passengers as revenue units rather than human beings. On this particular morning, however, her typically composed demeanor was fractured. She paced in front of the floor-to-ceiling windows, phone pressed to her ear, voice sharp with irritation. "How is this still in the news cycle? It has been nearly 24 hours. This should have died already." She paused, listening to the voice on the other end. "No, absolutely not. We do not apologize. That validates their narrative. Issue the statement we discussed. Standard procedure, ongoing investigation, safety first. The usual." She hung up and turned to face the three executives seated at her glass conference table. Thomas Alvarez, the CFO, Patricia Wilson, the head of PR, and Gregory Sanders, the chief operating officer. "This is ridiculous," Victoria said, returning to her seat at the head of the table. "We remove passengers who do not comply with crew instructions every day. Why is this one blowing up?" Thomas Alvarez studied Victoria carefully. At 51, he had been with Transatlantic longer than she had, joining the finance department, when the airline still prided itself on service. He had watched the corporate culture shift under successive CEOs, growing increasingly uncomfortable with the company's priorities. Though he respected Victoria's business acumen, he had begun to question whether their shared definition of success was too narrow. Maybe because he actually did not do anything wrong. Thomas ventured cautiously. "I have reviewed the videos circulating online. They do not align with our flight attendant's report." Victoria dismissed this with a wave. "Videos never show the whole story. Jessica is one of our most experienced flight attendants. If she felt threatened, that is good enough for me." Patricia Wilson slid her tablet across the table. "The video, for starters, it does not match our official account. And then there is this, the flight attendant whistleblower post. It has been shared over 200,000 times now." Victoria glanced at the screen and dismissed it with a wave. "Do we know who this flygirl witness is?" Gregory nodded. It traced the account. "It is Lucia Ramirez, junior flight attendant, 3 years with the company. Clean record until now." "Fire her," Victoria said without hesitation. "Violation of social media policy. Make an example." Thomas cleared his throat. "Victoria, if I may, that might pour gasoline on this fire. She is being hailed as a hero for speaking up. And frankly, if what she describes is accurate, we might want to examine the incident more carefully rather than circling the wagons. I do not care if they are calling her Mother Teresa, Victoria snapped. She publicly undermined a colleague and damaged the brand. Actions have consequences. She turned to Patricia. Draft the statement. Standard language about regrettable incidents, thorough investigation, commitment to customer service, blah, blah, blah. Do not specifically reference this case or apologize for anything. Patricia nodded, making notes on her tablet. And if they ask about the passenger, the media is trying to identify him. No comment on specific customers for privacy reasons, Victoria replied. The usual dodge. She stood up again, signaling the end of the meeting. This will blow over in a day or two. Some celebrity will do something stupid, and the internet will move on. In the meantime, find this Lucia Ramirez and terminate her. Today. As the others filed out, Thomas Alvarez lingered. He waited until they were alone before speaking. Victoria, there is something else we should discuss, he said, his voice carrying a note of concern that made her look up sharply. There has been unusual activity in the trading of our corporate debt instruments over the past few hours. Large block purchases of our bonds well above market value. Victoria, already turning back to her email, barely glanced up. And that sounds like good news. Increased demand for our debt means confidence in our ability to pay it back. It is the pattern that concerns me, Thomas pressed. These are not normal market transactions. Someone is systematically buying up significant portions of our outstanding debt. It could be the opening moves of a hostile action. A memory flashed through Victoria's mind. Her first week at business school. A professor discussing how corporate raiders in the 1980s sometimes used debt acquisition as a backdoor to control. She dismissed it as quickly as it came. Thomas, we just announced better than expected quarterly earnings. Our stock is up. This is likely just some hedge fund making a play based on our positive fundamentals. Monitor it, but I am not concerned. She looked at her watch. I have a board call in 5 minutes. Let us regroup on the PR situation at 4. Thomas wanted to push harder, but recognized the dismissal in her tone. With a nod, he left her office, the weight of concern still heavy on his shoulders. As he walked back to his own office, he could not shake the feeling that the two developing situations, the PR crisis and the mysterious debt purchases, might be connected in ways they did not yet understand. Victoria turned back to her computer, already focused on the quarterly presentation she would deliver to the board. The incident, as she was now thinking of it, was a minor irritation, a blip in an otherwise smooth-running operation. She had weathered far worse PR storms in her career. What Victoria Harrington failed to realize, however, was that this was no ordinary PR crisis. And what Thomas Alvarez had detected was not ordinary market activity. It was the first tremor of an earthquake. Sophia Martinez's corner office in the Lighthouse Capital building in Manhattan was a study in controlled chaos. 3 additional monitors had been wheeled in, joining the 2 already on her desk. Each displayed different aspects of the financial maneuvers now underway: bond prices, trading volumes, ownership percentages, and a complex network diagram of shell companies and acquisition vehicles. Sophia herself was the calm at the center of this storm. At 34, she had already earned a reputation as one of the most brilliant financial strategists of her generation. The daughter of Mexican immigrants who had worked as a janitor and a seamstress, she had fought her way through Stanford and Harvard Business School before Walter Reynolds had spotted her talent and made her his protege. Now, as CEO of his family office, she wielded financial power that most Wall Street veterans could only dream of. "We have liquidated the Meridian REIT position," announced James Fuller, her head trader from the adjoining war room, where a team of analysts and traders were executing her strategy. $1.7 billion ready to deploy. Sophia nodded without looking up from her screen. Route it through Lighthouse Cayman first, then split it between Alpine Holdings and Oceanic Partners for the purchases. Focus on the 2027 and 2029 bond tranches first. She turned to Rebecca Wong, her chief legal officer, who was coordinating with a team of lawyers on regulatory compliance. How are we doing on the disclosure thresholds? We are structured to stay under the radar, Rebecca confirmed. By using 23 separate entities, we can accumulate up to 70% of their outstanding debt before triggering any mandatory disclosures. We are currently at 17%. Good, Sophia replied. Keep it that way for now. Her phone rang the private line that only Walter had the number to. She answered immediately. We are at 17% already, she reported without preamble. The market is surprisingly liquid. A lot of institutional holders seem eager to sell. That is because Transatlantic's reputation has been declining for years. Walter's calm voice replied. Their treatment of me was symptomatic of deeper issues. How soon until we reach controlling position? Sophia glanced at the network diagram on her leftmost screen. At the current pace, we should have majority control of their debt within 72 hours. Sooner if we are willing to raise our bid premium. Do it, Walter instructed. Increase the premium by 5%. I want this done quickly before they realize what is happening. Understood, Sophia said. What about the public situation? The incident is trending on social media. Let it, Walter replied. It provides perfect cover for our financial moves. Everyone will be looking at the PR crisis while we quietly take control of their financial future. As they spoke, James approached with a tablet displaying real-time data on trading activity. We are hitting resistance on the 2035 bonds, he reported. Hudson Capital is refusing to sell their position even at a 7% premium. Sophia frowned. This was an unexpected obstacle. Who is behind Hudson? Morgan Banking Group, James replied. They are a longtime financial partner of Transatlantic. Sophia thought quickly. Reach out to Morgan's CFO directly. Offer them a debt swap our position in next-gen pharmaceuticals for their transatlantic bonds. They have been trying to get into biotech, and this gives them a premium entry point. James nodded and returned to the trading floor. Sophia returned to her call with Walter. We are encountering some resistance, but nothing we cannot overcome. We may need to get creative with a few of the debt holders. That is acceptable, Walter said. By the time they understand what is happening, it will be too late. What matters is that Transatlantic's management remains in the dark until we hold the controlling position. After they hung up, Sophia called the team together for a quick briefing. 20 financial professionals gathered around her, a diverse group of analysts, traders, and strategists who represented the meritocratic culture Walter had built at Lighthouse. Listen up, she said. This is not a standard acquisition. This is a strategic realignment of power. We are not buying Transatlantic Airways. We are buying the right to determine its future. She pointed to the monitors displaying their progress. We have 3 objectives. First, accumulate controlling interest in their debt. Second, remain anonymous until the position is secured. Third, prepare the terms we will impose once we reveal ourselves. She looked around the room, meeting each person's eyes. This is not just about business. This is about accountability. I have known Walter Reynolds for 12 years. He is the most principled person I have ever met. If he is taking this extraordinary step, then something fundamentally broken needs fixing. As the team dispersed back to their stations, Daniel Rivera, her deputy and longtime friend, approached quietly. $4 billion is a lot of money even for Walter, he said in a low voice. Are you sure this is the right response to what happened? Sophia considered his question carefully. I wondered the same thing, Daniel. But I think we are missing the point if we are looking at this as a reaction to a single incident. What is it then, he asked. It is a correction to a systemic problem, she replied. Walter has faced discrimination his entire life. This incident was the tipping point, not because it was the worst example, but because it revealed how deeply embedded the problem is in corporate culture. He is not using his resources for revenge. He is using them for reform. Daniel nodded slowly. But there is a fine line between reform and retribution, and $4.2 billion could fund a lot of direct impact programs. Scholarships, community investment, healthcare initiatives. You do not think I have considered that Sophia asked a rare edge in her voice. Walter already funds all those things. But sometimes, changing a system requires more than charity. It requires leverage. And if this fails, Daniel pressed, if Transatlantic fights back, or if the reforms do not stick, that is a lot of capital deployed for uncertain results. Sophia looked at the screens showing their progress. Then at least someone tried to change things at a structural level, rather than just treating symptoms. That is worth the risk. On her phone was a notification from a news app. Another story about the dignified passenger incident, now featuring interviews with multiple witnesses from the flight. The public narrative was solidifying, and it was entirely against Transatlantic Airways. Meanwhile, in the bond markets, a different kind of narrative was taking shape, one written in the language of capital and ownership of debt and obligation. It was a story few could read yet, but its conclusion would shake an entire corporation to its foundations. The San Francisco sunset painted the bay in hues of orange and gold, a beautiful backdrop that only heightened Walter's sense of loss. From his suite at the Four Seasons, he could see the Stanford campus in the distance, where at this very moment, Zoe was receiving her master's degree without her grandfather in attendance. He stood at the window, one hand resting against the cool glass, the other holding the small box containing the Patek Philippe watch. The weight of it in his palm seemed to grow heavier with each passing minute. He had carefully polished it that morning, imagining the moment he would place it in Zoe's hands, tell her about her great-grandfather, see the connection between generations form in real time. Now that moment was gone, irretrievable. His phone rang. Zoe's face appeared on the screen. He took a deep breath, composing himself before answering. "Grandpa." Her voice was concerned. "Where are you?" "Mom and Dad said your flight had some kind of problem." Walter moved away from the window, settling into an armchair, choosing his words carefully. "I am in San Francisco, sweetheart. I made it to the city, but not in time for the ceremony. I am so sorry." "What happened?" Dad was being weird about it. "Did the flight get canceled?" Walter hesitated. He had never burdened Zoe with the realities of the discrimination he had faced throughout his life, preferring to focus on her opportunities rather than his obstacles. When she was 12 and asked why people sometimes stared at them in restaurants, he had redirected her attention to the menu. When she was 16 and questioned why a store security guard followed them, he had simply said, "Some people are doing their jobs poorly." But she was 24 now with a master's in computer science and a sharp mind that deserved honesty. "There was an incident on the plane," he said, finally, his voice even. "A misunderstanding that resulted in my removal from the flight." "Removal?" Her voice sharpened. "What kind of misunderstanding gets someone removed from a flight?" "The kind that happens when certain assumptions are made based on appearance," Walter said gently. "It is not the first time, Zoe. It will not be the last." A beat of silence followed. Then her voice came back quieter now. "Because you are black. Because I am black. Because I am older. Because I was not dressed like someone they thought belonged in their space." Walter confirmed. "It happens in different ways, but the root is always the same." The silence on the other end of the line stretched longer this time. When Zoe spoke again, her voice trembled with a mixture of anger and realization. "You have never told me about this stuff." "Not really. All these years has this been happening to you?" Walter closed his eyes briefly. "Yes." That is so wrong," Zoe said, her voice rising. "You should sue them or something." A small, sad smile crossed Walter's face. How simple it seemed to the young sue them, fight back, demand justice. As if the systems were not designed to exhaust those who challenged them, to make the cost of justice prohibitively high for most. "There are more effective approaches than litigation." "Zoe," he said. "But do not worry about that now. This is your day of celebration. I will see you tomorrow for lunch, and you can tell me all about the ceremony." "It would have been better with you there," she said softly. "I know, sweetheart. I wanted to be there more than anything." After they hung up, Walter remained in the armchair, looking out at the darkening sky. The conversation with Zoe had stirred memories, decades of similar misunderstandings that had shaped his approach to business and life. He remembered being 30, fresh off his first major logistics contract, walking into a Mercedes dealership, ready to buy his first luxury car outright. The salesman had directed him to the used car section without a word. "Those might be more in your price range," he had said with a thin smile. Walter had left without correcting him and bought a Bentley from a dealer across town the next day. He remembered being 42 now, worth over $100 million, arriving at a private banking event at the Plaza Hotel, where he was scheduled to speak about supply chain financing innovations. The host had stopped him at the door. "The service entrance is around the corner," he had said, not unkindly. When Walter explained he was the keynote speaker, the man's face had gone through a complex series of expressions, ending with a mortified apology that Walter had accepted with grace he did not feel. But the memory that haunted him most came from 1992. His son Marcus had just turned 10. They were shopping for a birthday gift in an upscale Chicago toy store. Walter had been examining a model airplane kit when he realized store security was following them closely. As he turned to look for Marcus, he saw his son reaching for a display model. Before he could speak, a security guard grabbed Marcus's arm roughly. "Put that down," the guard had barked. "You cannot afford it anyway." Walter had intervened immediately, his voice cold with controlled fury. "Take your hands off my son, now." The incident had escalated to the store manager then, to a humiliating scene where Walter had to produce multiple credit cards and ID to prove he belonged in the store. Throughout it all, Marcus had stood silent, watching his father navigate the situation with dignity under pressure. That night, as Walter tucked him into bed, Marcus had asked a question that still echoed in Walter's heart. "Dad, does this happen because of our skin?" Walter had wanted to shield him from the truth, but he could not lie. "Sometimes, son. But remember, their ignorance does not define your worth." The next day, Walter had purchased the building that housed the toy store. Within a month, he had terminated the lease and replaced the business with a community bookstore that emphasized diverse literature and hired staff from the neighborhood. He remembered being 56, bidding on a major commercial property in downtown Chicago. His offer, identical to a competitor's, was rejected with no explanation. Through back channels, he had learned the owners felt more comfortable with the other buyer. Walter had responded by purchasing the adjacent 3 properties and developing them into a complex that overshadowed the original building and eventually forced its sale to him at a discount. Each incident had taught him that direct confrontation rarely yielded the right results. Power, real power, was exercised quietly, strategically, and with patience. What had happened on that transatlantic flight was hardly the most egregious example of discrimination he had faced. But it had occurred at a particularly vulnerable moment, one that robbed him of an irreplaceable experience with his granddaughter. And it revealed a system that was not just flawed, but fundamentally corrupted by the very people entrusted to operate it. His phone buzzed with the text from Sophia, 28% and climbing. No detection yet. Walter nodded to himself. The plan was proceeding perfectly. By the time Victoria Harrington and her team understood what was happening, it would be too late. They would find themselves answering to a new authority, one with very different priorities. He opened the small box containing Zoe's Patek Philippe watch, running his finger over its exquisite craftsmanship. His father's words echoed in his memory. A good watch does not just tell you the time, it reminds you that every second matters. How you use those seconds defines your life. For a moment, doubt crept in. Was he using his resources wisely? $4 billion could build hospitals, fund scholarships, transform communities. Was it right to deploy such capital for what could be seen as a personal grievance? The doubt passed as quickly as it had come. This was not personal. It was systemic. The hospitals would help individuals, but they would not change the culture that treated certain people as less deserving of dignity than others. The scholarships would open doors for a few, but they would not transform the institutions that decided who belonged and who did not. Sometimes change required leverage. And in the corporate world, the only leverage that truly mattered was financial. Walter Reynolds had used his seconds building something remarkable. Now he would use them to correct something fundamentally broken. Tomorrow he would give Zoe her gift. And somewhere in Chicago, the wheels he had set in motion would continue to turn precise and inevitable as the movement of time itself. Victoria Harrington strode into the executive boardroom, tablet in hand, the picture of corporate confidence, despite the brewing PR storm. Around the massive mahogany table sat Transatlantic's executive leadership team, and several board members gathered for their monthly operations review. The room itself was a testament to the company's priorities, sleek, expensive, and impressive, but ultimately disconnected from the day-to-day realities of air travel. The table alone cost more than a flight attendant's annual salary. Photographs of Transatlantic's fleet adorned the walls, each aircraft captured in perfect lighting against dramatic skies. No crowded terminals, no frustrated passengers, no overworked staff in these sanitized images. It was a cathedral of corporate power, a space where the messy human element of the airline business was reduced to spreadsheets, metrics, and stock prices. The contrast with the cramped aircraft cabin where Walter Reynolds had stood just days ago could not have been starker. Here, the air was perfectly conditioned, the chairs ergonomically designed, the lighting calibrated to flatter aging executives. "Let us start with the obvious," Victoria said, taking her place at the head of the table. "The incident on Flight 327 continues to generate negative press, but our analytics show it is already losing steam. These things have a short half-life. By next week, the internet will have moved on to the next outrage." Gregory Sanders, the COO, nodded in agreement. "We have suspended the flight attendant who posted online, Lucia Ramirez. The union is making noise, but legally, we are on solid ground. Social media policy violation is clear-cut." "And what about the flight attendant who initiated the incident?" Thomas Alvarez asked. "Jessica Morris." Victoria waved dismissively. She followed procedure as she understood it. Perhaps a bit overzealous, but she was acting to maintain order. According to 7 passenger testimonials and a viral video, she falsely accused an elderly passenger of aggression when his water bottle accidentally fell. Thomas pointed out, his voice carefully neutral, but his eyes challenging. The room grew uncomfortably quiet. Victoria stared at Thomas, unused to being questioned so directly in front of others. "Thomas," she said coolly, "if you have concerns about how we are handling this, we can discuss them privately. For now, let us focus on the business impact." Patricia Wilson, head of PR, seized the opening. "The narrative is not improving, Victoria. We have had over 2,000 reservation cancellations in the past 24 hours. Corporate accounts are calling, asking about our diversity policies. The video has now been viewed over 8 million times. Victoria waved this away. "Temporary blip. Our Q2 bookings are still up 4% year over year. People complain about airlines constantly, but they always come back to whoever has the best route at the best price. Which brings me to our actual business." She turned to Thomas. "Thomas talked to me about the refinancing plan." Thomas, who had been uncharacteristically quiet, glanced up from his notes. "Yes. Well, we are on track for the debt restructuring next month. As you know, we have a $2.3 billion tranche of corporate bonds maturing that we plan to roll over into a new issuance." He hesitated, then continued. "There is, however, some unusual activity I mentioned earlier. We are seeing significant purchases of our existing debt instruments in the secondary market. The buyers appear to be using shell companies, making it difficult to determine who is behind it." Victoria frowned slightly. "Hedge funds, most likely. Our strong earnings report probably triggered some algorithmic buying." "How significant are these purchases?" "Substantial," Thomas replied carefully. "Preliminary reports suggest as much as 28% of our outstanding debt may have changed hands in the past 24 hours. This finally captured Victoria's full attention. 28%. That is, Unusual. It is, Thomas confirmed. I have asked our banking partners at Goldman and JP Morgan to investigate. So far, they have not been able to identify the ultimate beneficial owners of these purchasing entities. Board member Richard Townsend, a veteran of corporate finance, leaned forward. That sounds like the opening moves of a hostile strategy, Victoria. Someone could be positioning themselves to exert leverage during the refinancing. Victoria considered this, then shook her head. Even if someone managed to acquire a significant portion of our debt, what leverage would they have? We are profitable. Our credit rating is stable. They cannot force any onerous terms on us because we have options, unless they acquired a controlling interest, Thomas pointed out. Then they could potentially dictate terms or even trigger technical defaults by changing covenants. Victoria laughed. A controlling interest. That would require billions in capital deployed in complete secrecy, targeting a fundamentally sound company. It is far-fetched, perhaps Richard conceded. But I have seen stranger things in my 40 years on Wall Street. I recommend we prepare contingencies. At this point, William Blake, a recently appointed board member and former Airline CEO, spoke up. Blake was known for his traditional views and close relationship with Victoria. This sounds like paranoia to me. We should be focusing on containing this PR situation, not chasing financial ghosts. Thomas wanted to push back, but recognized the political dynamics. Blake was Victoria's ally on the board, and challenging him directly would be unwise. Fine, Victoria said, clearly relieved by Blake's support. Thomas worked with legal to prepare defensive options just in case. But let us focus on actual problems, not hypotheticals. She swiped to the next slide on her tablet. Now about the new baggage fee structure we are implementing next quarter. As the meeting continued, Thomas found it hard to concentrate. The patterns he was seeing in the debt markets triggered every alarm bell in his experienced financial mind. The timing immediately following the Flight 327 incident seemed too coincidental, and the scale and speed of the purchases suggested not an opportunistic hedge fund, but a strategic actor with a specific goal. He glanced at Victoria, who was now enthusiastically outlining how the new fee structure would add $87 million in annual revenue. He had known her for 15 years, watched as the idealistic marketing executive had transformed into the hard-edged CEO before him. She was brilliant in many ways, but her blind spot had always been her inability to see beyond the numbers to the human elements of the business. That same blindness now prevented her from connecting the dots between the viral incident and the strange financial activity. In her world, these were separate issues, a PR problem that would fade, and a market anomaly that required minimal attention. After the meeting, Thomas stayed behind, arranging his papers slowly until only he and William Blake remained. William, he said carefully about the debt activity. Blake cut him off. Thomas, I have known Victoria for 20 years. She is right on this. Do not waste resources chasing shadows. But what if it is not a shadow? Thomas persisted. What if someone is actually executing a strategy against us? Blake's expression hardened. Then we will handle it. Transatlantic is not some fragile startup. We have resources, connections, options. Do not let this PR distraction make you jumpy. Thomas recognized the futility of further discussion. Blake, like Victoria, suffered from the corporate blindness that had become endemic in Transatlantic's leadership culture, the inability to see potential threats that did not fit their established worldview. It was this very blindness that made the strategy being executed by Sophia Martinez and Lighthouse Capital so devastatingly effective. By the time Victoria Harrington and William Blake understood what was happening, the noose would already be around Transatlantic's corporate neck, and somewhere in San Francisco, Walter Reynolds was patiently waiting for the moment when he would pull it tight.